Hiya, this is Miss C again. We are going to move on today to a brand new literature text. Obviously, I know school to school varies, so it may be that certain texts aren't ones that your particular school is doing. But with that in mind, over time, I hope to build up enough so that there's something for most people. For all 21 of my subscribers. But anyway, like I say, I'm doing this for the long run. I want this to be there when people sort of get to points in the year where they're thinking, okay, I need to start revising now. And then there'll be hopefully a bank of videos on the text that you feel you need the most help with. So anyway, we're going to move on to Jekyll and Hyde today. I love it. Some students find it less enjoyable, which I can understand because I think Robert Louis Stevenson, who is, as I hope you know, the writer of this novel, he is a Victorian writer. And if anyone here has ever read any Charles Dickens, you will know that the writing of the Victorian era writers does tend to be a little bit more wordy, a little bit more sort of long-winded, and sometimes that can be a little bit hard to follow. So we're not talking sort of early modern English like Shakespeare. We are talking the English that we speak, but maybe language that you wouldn't necessarily use anymore, words that have died out, words that you wouldn't necessarily use in day-to-day conversations. So I think we're going to have a go at mainly working through maybe a chapter, an episode, but there may be a couple of times when we sort of change that up a little bit depending on if there's a particularly long or short chapter or whatever. So I thought we'd start with chapter 1, but I will probably bring in a bit of context here and there as I go. But as with Macbeth, if there is a sort of a need for it, people want it later on down the line, I can easily do a kind of separate context video for whatever text you want. So we're going to start with Jekyll and Hyde, start with chapter 1, written by Robert Louis Stevenson in the Victorian era. And we're going to just start with the story, because like I've said before, if you know the story, nothing else can completely throw you or terrify you, because you know what examples you can give. If you're asked about a specific theme or character, you know that you can always come back to moments in the plot that you know because you're confident with the story. So that's why I think just knowing that story is just, as I've said, so important. So chapter 1 is 10 chapters, this novel, okay, novella. Chapter 1 is called Story of the Door. And the very first thing that Robert Louis Stevenson, I'll just call him Stevenson introduces us to is the character of Mr. Gabriel Utterson, okay? Not sure if we learn his first name this early on, I don't think we do. But his name is Gabriel Utterson. And we learn that he is a lawyer and that he is a little bit of a funny one, because he sort of is described in a way that in theory makes him sound pretty rubbish. Like he's kind of described as being long, lean, dusty, dreary. His face was never lighted by a smile. And Stevenson sort of goes into some detail describing how he's a bit rubbish, really, a bit boring and not much good company and whatever else. However, he finishes that description by saying, and yet somehow lovable, but yet somehow lovable. Now, this already brings up one of the really, really key themes of this novel, and it's sort of the biggest theme, really, and that is this idea of duality, the idea of there being two sides to things, the idea of man being not one but two, and we'll go much, much more into that as the novel goes on. But I think it's interesting to note that, yes, obviously, Jekyll and Hyde would be the huge, glaring example, the characters Jekyll and Hyde, of how duality really works. But it's interesting to see that other characters also have a dual nature. There's sides of them that aren't as obvious. So despite the fact that Utterson may seem kind of boring and he may seem lean, dusty, dreary, people still love him. All right, people still really love having him around. People like to talk to him because he is he's almost described as being quite a calming, solid, stable influence in people's lives. So I think the suggestion here is that people sort of like to be in his company. He doesn't judge. He doesn't like to get involved in people's business. He says, I let my brother go to the devil in his own way. Now, don't get confused by that. He doesn't mean his own brother as in he's talking about a family member. He means my brother as in, you know, my fellow man. We're all brothers and sisters in this world kind of thing. So basically what he means is if someone's going to go to the devil, if someone's going to make bad choices, go the wrong way, he's like, it's not really up to me to kind of judge that. It's not really up to me to condemn them for that. If that's what they choose to do, I will let that happen, you know, and I will be there as a lawyer or as a friend, and I will hear them out and I will sort of give them whatever support is needed. But it's not for me to judge or get involved. Now, if you know the story at all, you will know that this is actually quite ironic, because despite him saying this and saying, you know, I don't like to get involved, I let my brother go to the devil in his own way, he very quickly, once he sort of gets involved in Jekyll's dealings with Hyde and doesn't know who Hyde is, etc., he very quickly gets involved, and he very quickly sort of asks the questions and goes around investigating and doing all that. I'm just going to move my mirror out of the way a little bit. You know, and sort of really does get very involved, despite the fact that he says he doesn't like to do that. So again, duality. We're all guilty, I'm sure you would agree. We're all very guilty of occasionally saying something and, you know, maybe even believing something about ourselves that it doesn't take long for us to realise isn't true. You know, oh no, I would never do that, I would never do that. And then you sort of realise that you're doing it and you found yourself doing it. It's human nature. And this is the thing. Shakespeare created humans and Stevenson creates humans, in the sense that, you know, people behave in this novel in ways that aren't just one thing, aren't just one way, because humans are complex creatures, aren't we? We're all odd and strange and make weird choices and weird decisions and do strange things. Maybe not quite as strange as Jekyll or Hyde, but anyway. So back to the story. We've got Utterson, and people like to be around him, even though he seems slightly boring. He doesn't like to judge, he doesn't like to get involved, and he is obviously a lawyer, so he's quite often, I think it says, the last good influence in the lives of downgoing men, as in men that are maybe in trouble with the law, men that have made bad decisions, men that are sort of, you know, about to get locked up, or back then it could have been, you know, hung or executed. And he does tend to be the last kind of decent influence in these people's lives, because maybe he's represented them as a lawyer or whatever else. So Utterson is our protagonist, okay? He's our protagonist throughout this novel. We stay with him until the end of chapter 8. When we get to the end of chapter 8, we do actually leave him for reasons I'll get to when we get to that part, but we won't worry about that for now. But we essentially see the plot unravel through Utterson. It is in third person, this novel, but we mainly stick with Utterson's perspective, okay? A couple of moments where we hear stories from other people as kind of embedded narratives, like we get in this chapter with his friend. But on the whole, Utterson is who we kind of travel through the novel with. So we've met him, we know he's a lawyer. We also discover that he has a friend called Enfield, Richard Enfield. Now, Richard Enfield is described as a well-known man about town, okay? Now, this is quite euphemistic. What we got to remember in this novel is that Stevenson was writing for a Victorian audience, okay? And Victorian readers were quite, there were a lot of expectations with in Victorian society. There was a lot of belief of sort of the right way to behave and the proper way to behave. And, you know, the idea that women should, you know, not even show their ankles. And I've actually done a little video on TikTok about this, but, you know, this was an era where the legs of tables and sort of stools and chair legs and stuff, pianos, whatever, had to be covered with like cloths, tablecloths or whatever, because it was seen as too phallic and it was seen as inappropriate to even show legs of furniture. So, you know, you're looking at a time when it was expected that people behave in certain ways. And despite the fact that gossip in Victorian times was rife, as it still is really, we just have more ways to spread gossip now. But back then, you know, word of mouth was huge and people gossip, people talk, but it was all behind closed doors, because on the surface, you didn't do that. You didn't gossip, you didn't get involved in stuff, you went to church, you were God-fearing, you were good people, and you behaved in the appropriate way. Now, as is the same in any era, Victorian era was no different, that was all a load of nonsense, because unsurprisingly, people behave like people, which means there are good people, there are bad people, there are promiscuous people, there are people that cheat on their partners, there are people that are gay, there are people that are straight, there are people that like certain things. And we're looking at a time when anything that wasn't the norm was seen as odd and kind of wrong. So there are references to homosexuality in this, but very, very kind of veiled, because Stevenson, remember, is writing for a Victorian audience that maybe can't handle too much suggestion of these kinds of things that they might see as a bit naughty, a bit taboo. So Man About Town, coming back to that and why I started this, it suggests that he liked to get out and about, but it's never ever given any real detail as to what Enfield does about town and what he's doing and where he's going and kind of the sorts of people that he's hanging around with. We just know that he is sociable, he does like to get out and about, and he is somebody that for some reason is very good friends with Utterson. Now, it's odd, and it's described as being a nut to crack for people who see them, because as we know, Utterson is this sort of character that's quite reserved and doesn't like to get involved in things. He doesn't even like to sort of treat himself to things like going to the theatre or, you know, drinking gin, which he really likes, but he doesn't drink it in public. So again, it's all about people masking what they want because of how it would look. And we have to remember this, because it's partly, well, it's a huge part really of why Hyde even comes to be, because of the kind of society that he is created into and the sort of expectations that were placed upon people, especially people of higher class backgrounds, because that was where there was real sort of emphasis and pressure put, which was, you know, gentlemen, especially Victorian gentlemen, you behave in certain ways and you don't, you know, you don't show yourselves up, you don't let yourself down. Anyway, so we learn that Utterson and Enfield, they're cousins, okay? I don't think it's discovered in this chapter that they are cousins, but they are. It says distant kinsmen, but they are cousins, we find out later. And for some reason, they, despite the fact that they seem to have nothing in common, they go for a weekly walk on a Sunday together, right? Every week. And even though quite often people see them out looking like they've got nothing to say to each other, they still do it. And they make sure, I think it's described as they both see it as the chief jewel in their week. So they really do put a lot of sort of, you know, it's important to them, this weekly walk. And this is where the story starts to really sort of get involved, because what we discover is that during one of these walks one week, they are walking past, they're walking down a road, right? And they're walking past a doorway in that road. Now, this street that they're walking down is described as being a very sort of affluent looking, really welcoming road with lots of different shop fronts along it. It's well kept, everything's very welcoming, everything's very sort of affluent looking, and it all seems lovely, okay? But there's this strange building within that road. So you've got the road, and then sort of towards the end of this road where you get to a corner, there's this one building which doesn't seem to fit in with the building around it. And the buildings around it, as I said, all seem very pleasant, but this one seems to, I think it says, bore the marks of sort of sordid negligence, like it had just been left to itself for a very long time, okay? Loads of description of this building being sort of without a door, without a knocker, so symbolically, I suppose, not very welcoming, no way of entering, no way of someone knowing if someone's there. There was no window. The door itself was sort of, it was described as like tramps slouched in the doorways, and it's overall just this sort of real sense of a neglected, unpleasant doorway. Now, what Enfield says as they're walking past this, he goes, "Oh, have you ever noticed that door before?" And Utterson doesn't really say much. And Enfield says, "Oh, it reminds me of a story. Reminds me of something that sort of happened a little while ago." And again, Victorian time was a time when this idea of gossiping, this idea of sort of talking about things that weren't your business or, you know, were seen as unsavoury, that was quite rife. So they talk about it, but once Enfield tells the story, he sort of goes, "Right, we're not going to talk about this again," because it's almost seen as inappropriate that he even told this story. And this is the story he now tells. He says that he was coming home from, I think he describes it as someplace at the end of the world, as in, again, euphemistically, I was off somewhere, but I ain't going to tell you where. Very late one night, early one morning. And he describes it as being a very dark night, and he's walking along, and actually he starts to feel a little bit like freaked out because it's also dark and creepy. And he describes how he was walking along and suddenly he noticed that there was a little girl. And it's never explained why this little girl was out at God knows what time in the morning, but she was. There is a theory about this, I'll talk to you about in a minute. And she's walking along the road, and sort of walking towards her, coming from the other side, is a man, and he's sort of described as being a little dwarfish sort of man that's stamping along the streets, okay? And he describes the sort of way they collide with each other as being, he sort of describes it as the man, who we don't know who he is yet, tramples over this little girl. He knocks her over and he sort of tramples over her. And then he describes it as he left her screaming on the floor. Now, there is a school of thought which suggests that maybe he didn't trample her, and that was euphemistic as well. That I have read in a couple of places here and there that actually this was actually a rape, because the reaction of everybody afterwards is so dramatic and so sort of huge that it might suggest that it was more than him just knocking a girl over and trampling on her. But either way, he does that. The girl screams, and Enfield sort of grabs this guy because he's obviously knocked over this little girl, and he wants to, you know, make sure that this man is made accountable for that. So he grabs this guy, collars him, and he sort of brings him back. And by this point, all of this girl's family are sort of gathered around as well, and they're furious, and they're shouting and screaming, and they want to kill him. Now, this is the first time, obviously, spoilers, this is Mr. Hyde, okay? This is Edward Hyde, who has just done this to this little girl. And Enfield doesn't know that yet, but that's who we found it out to be. And what is commented on really early on, as soon as Hyde enters the story, is quite how much everybody, and I mean everybody that meets him, hates him, all right? And Enfield sort of says, like, yeah, he wasn't a particularly nice guy to look at. He wasn't very attractive. He was sort of dwarfish and ugly and whatever. But everyone that sort of describes him comes back to this idea of, it wasn't that, though, that made me hate him. There was something about him. There was something about the way he looked which gave some sort of impression of deformity or malformation, right? And as we go along in the story, I'm going to talk to you about why that is. But for now, we'll just carry on. And it's suggested again and again that whoever looks at him just has this desire to sort of get away from him or kill him, and just hates looking at him, right? And he uses the example of the doctor that's turned up to look at this little girl. And he sort of says, you know, this doctor was, I think he describes him as being as emotional as a bagpipe, as in, you know, he was as emotional as an inanimate object. He had no emotion. He wasn't someone that seemed like they wanted to start a fight or, you know, easily hated people. He was very cut and dry. But for some reason, even he looked at this man, Hyde, like he wanted to kill him. So he was like, you know, it's understandable that the family of this girl wanted to, but this doctor, even he seemed to look like he wanted to as well. And I always find that to be a really interesting comment, you know, because it continues and continues throughout the whole novel. But this hatred that Hyde fosters in people is really important for later themes and later events. So they've grabbed him, and the girl was all right. She's just scared. And they essentially say, right, well, what are you going to do about this? You know, what are you going to do about this? You need to make this better. You need to make sure that you essentially compensate the family for what you've done. And they say, if you don't do something about it, we're going to make your name stink from one end of London to the other. Now, again, reputation at this point was a very important part of being a Victorian. So that was a threat that sort of shouldn't have been taken lightly. You know, this idea of we're going to make sure that wherever you go, people know what kind of a person you are. That would have been something that resonated with someone if it was a threat. So what Hyde essentially does is he goes, all right then, and he disappears into that doorway that Enfield saw on their walk. So we've kind of come back to the present when he tells his story. And he disappears inside, and he comes out again with a cheque for, I should have remembered this. I want to say and I can't remember, £10, £90. He essentially gives them a lot of money. It would have worked out to be a huge amount of money now, but it's a cheque written in somebody else's name, okay? Somebody else's name, and that person isn't mentioned at the time. We don't know who that person is yet, but we do find out, and I will tell you it's Jekyll's name, okay? Henry Jekyll. Now we'll find out who all these people are properly in a minute, so don't worry. So he finds out, he gives his cheque, and then he gives some money in sort of cash as well. And everyone's a bit like, okay, but the name isn't your name, blah, blah, blah. And what he sort of says is, okay, well, look, if you don't trust that this is going to, like, he thinks the cheque's going to bounce. You young people probably don't have a lot of experience with cheques, but they don't want the cheque to sort of, not be valid or whatever. So he says, okay, well, look, we'll wait together until the bank's open, and then you'll see that I'm good on my word. And they do that. They sort of wait. And then when the banks are open, they go, and the cheque clears, and it all seems fine. Now, again, the name isn't mentioned of who the cheque belonged to, because cheques have to be signed by someone, and it wasn't signed by Hyde. But Hyde does give his name. Like, we learn that this man that did it is called Edward Hyde, but we don't know the name of the person whose chequebook it was, if that makes sense. But we know there must be a connection between the guy who signed the cheque or had the chequebook and Hyde, because obviously why would he have his chequebook, right? We also know that this doorway is the doorway that Hyde entered into that night. And that's what reminded Enfield as they're walking, okay? Now, Utterson doesn't say a lot when he's told this story, but he kind of says, like, you'll have to forgive me, but I think I actually know the name of who that cheque was written by. And Enfield's a bit like, oh, okay, so you know. Now, again, this gets a little bit confusing, but you will find out how he knows in a minute. Because basically, they part ways. They agree they're not going to talk about it again, because, again, it would be seen as potentially being a bit inappropriate to have a conversation with your friend, apparently. But they sort of say, yeah, we're not going to talk about this again. And they say goodbye. But Utterson is left quite troubled by this. And we're about to find out why. So he goes home. And he goes to because he's a lawyer, remember? And he goes to his sort of safe where he keeps his documents and stuff. And he gets out a document. Now, this is one of many documents in this novel. Try and keep count. It's an interesting one. If anyone knows how many, do please comment. I think I worked it out to be, depending on what ones you include and don't include, throughout the novel, by the end of the story, I think you're on about 10 different documents that have some importance, but I'll double check. Anyway, so he gets out a document, and it turns out to be the will of a man called Dr. Henry Jekyll. And in this will, he's already read this will, but he's gotten it out again because this event has reminded him. He gets this will out and he reads it. And his friend, it turns out, and client, Henry Jekyll, has recently changed his will so that he is leaving all of his property, all of his money, to a certain man called Edward Hyde. Okay. And the thing that has confused Utterson, we find out it had been kind of a problem for Utterson for a while, this will, because he didn't know who Hyde was. Hyde was just some guy that's randomly been mentioned. Suddenly Jekyll, a doctor with a lot of money, is leaving all of his earthly possessions to this man. And that worried Utterson at first when he didn't know what this man was like. Now, obviously, he now has discovered that whoever this Hyde is, he's a fiend, he's a bad dude. So this has made Utterson even more worried, because he's like, well, why is my friend, who is a doctor, he's an intelligent man, he's a good guy, he's religious, and he's a doctor, and he donates to charities and whatever else. Why is he, number one, involved with a man who tramples children in the middle of the night? Number two, why is he giving him all his stuff? Why is that even like a thing? And so he decides that he needs to actually find out more about this character, Hyde. He's like, maybe if I can put a name to his face and meet him, I can understand what this is all about. And he starts to wonder if Jekyll is maybe being blackmailed by Hyde, and maybe that explains it. The other very strange thing about what's been written in the will is it doesn't just say, oh, you know, when I die, I want all my stuff to go to this guy. It actually says, if in the event of death or disappearance for more than 3 calendar months, right? So not just if I die, but if I disappear for longer than a few months. That's an odd thing to have in your will. All right, I don't have. I should write a will probably, but it's an odd thing to include unless you're thinking that you might disappear. And again, well, that opens a whole new load of questions, doesn't it? So Utterson decides after this he needs to find out what is going on with this man and his strange sort of connection with his friend. So he decides that he's going to go back out and he's going to try and go and see